Hey, this is Alan. I want to welcome you to the What is Rooted webinar. We're going to be starting in just a few minutes. If you wouldn't mind, there's a question box that's available in your controls there. Go ahead and in the question box type in your name and where you're from. We'd like to know who has joined us on the webinar so far today. All right, so we have Jesse from Miami, Florida, Crossbridge Church. Welcome, Jesse. Glad to have you today. Yeah, the way GoToWebinar works, you won't be able to talk to me at all, so you can use that chat box. All right, Diana Snyder from Arab, Alabama. I think you were on my webinar the other day, Diana. Welcome. Glad to have you. Craig Staples from Cumming, Georgia, Newport Church. Welcome. Glad to have you. Just down the road from me. I live in Greenville, South Carolina. So good to have you. All right, who else is with us? Go ahead in the chat, in the question box, just type your name and where you're from. Laura Lynn Vasquez from Rancho Community Church in Temecula, California. Welcome. Good to have you with us. All right, who else has joined us so far? All right, Isaac from Spokane Valley, Washington. Welcome. Glad to have you. We have the whole, we'll have all of North America represented before we know it. I was looking at the list earlier. We've got people from all around. I don't want to say just the country because we have some representatives from Canada. Always glad to have Canadians with us. Paul from Rochester, Minnesota. Welcome, Paul. Good to have you on. Who else is with us? Dixon from Pismo Beach. Hey, Dixon. I think we've talked before. Good to have you. My wife grew up right in Atascadero, not far from you, so had a lot of trips down there in our early years of marriage when her folks were living there. But anyway, nice part of the country. We're all very jealous that you get to live in Pismo Beach, so that's how that goes. All right, who else has joined us? Go ahead and say hello in the question box. Let us know who you are and where you're from. Be glad to welcome you. All right, Justin from Corona. Good to have you. California, that is. Not the beer company. And I don't know why I would know about that. So never mind. I didn't say that. All right, who else is with us? All right, Elizabeth from Lawrence, Kansas. Elizabeth, I was born in Lawrence, Kansas. So living in South Carolina now, they want me to be a Jayhawk or they want me to be a South Carolina Gamecock. And I tell them, no, I mean, they want me to be a Clemson Tiger. And I said, no, I'm a Jayhawk by birth. So, yeah, I grew up in Lawrence, and there we go, Rock Chalk Jayhawk on there. And I actually grew up in Topeka, Kansas. My dad worked for Hallmark Cards for 37 years. So, yeah, that's my neck of the woods. All right, who else has joined us? Go ahead in the question box. Tell us your name and where you're from. Oh, Elizabeth also grew up in Topeka. So, and now you're in Lawrence, so we could talk about things like, Buffalo Bob's and, places like that. So, all right, Josh from San Diego. Welcome, Josh. Glad to have you with us on the webinar. And Bobby from Conway, Arkansas. Welcome, Bobby. Glad to have you. All right, anybody we haven't heard from yet? Appreciate you guys being on here early. The way that the webinar will work is we're going to give a fairly short presentation. Caleb Anderson is here with me and Robin Riley, who are at Mariners Church in California. And we'll do a brief presentation, and then we'll use this question box for you to ask questions, and we'll spend as much time as we need answering your questions about Rooted and how that's been used at Mariners and now with a couple other churches across the country. So there is Caleb. Hi, Caleb.
Hi.
Yeah, so we have East Coast, West Coast here, so that's all right. All right, for those of you joining us, if you wouldn't mind, in the question box, go ahead and give us your name and where you're from so we know who's on here. All right, well, while we're ready to getting started, you've kind of told me where you're from. What we're going to do is we're going to take a little poll, and the first poll we're going to ask is where you live. And so real quick on your computer, it's kind of like a game show. Go ahead and tell us what quadrant of the country or the North America you are from. And I tried to do my best to represent here, but they only gave me 5 spots. So yeah, go ahead and put it in the poll there. So far, the West and Northwest is tied with the Southeast. There's Canada represented. I knew you were around. And oh, now the West and Northwest is leading. Now we're tied again. All right, just a couple more seconds, and cast your vote there. All right, so if you're in the Southeast, go ahead and put your vote in, because I would like the Southeast to beat the West, just because I'm already outnumbered as far as the moderators and panelists go today. There we go. So maybe I'll end it right there. We're tied. I don't know. Okay, well, we're going to close that one out. And so we're tied, Southeast and the West, and followed by the Midwest and the Northeast and Canada. You got you on the board there. All right, let's ask the next question, and I want to know, how did you hear about the Rooted Network? And I know this is a little unfair because a lot of you are on my list, but go ahead and tell us how you found out about Rooted. I'm not competitive at all, but I am clearly winning, Caleb. All right. But you notice that the second, it's either from Alan White or from a friend, that I would not be considered the friend. All right. Got a few people there. All right, we got one more question before we get started here, and then we're going to end our fun and games. And so what I want to know is what role you have. And I had to lump a bunch of things together on this one because they only give me 5 spots. So if I didn't include your spot, I apologize in advance. All right, looks like we have about 17% senior pastors, 10% executive pastors, 72% discipleship, small group, spiritual formations. I mean, I used to be called the minister of Christian education. I didn't even have room to put that on here. Let's see, we don't have anybody from students or children, and it appears that everybody knows why they're here. So that's always very, very positive. So glad to have all of you. And so, can I vote twice, somebody asked. You can't now, but you might be able to on November the 8th. No, I did not say that. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started before I get into any trouble. So with us today are Caleb Anderson. Caleb is the lead pastor at Mariners Church, Huntington Beach, and he's also the CEO of the Rooted Network. Caleb has also just come out with a new book called Favor with Kings, that a lot of the people that aren't doing Rooted at Mariners are doing Favor with Kings right now. And so that might be one to check out. Robin Riley is also with us. She's the COO of the Rooted Network, and she is a pastor at Mariners Church Irvine. Now, I liked it when Robin's title was Chief Strategist. I thought that was kind of a cool title for a church. But there's Robin peeking in there. Hi, Robin.
Hi.
And then there's me, and you know me. and I'm the one that pollutes the internet with small group stuff. But I'm also a coach for the Rooted Network, and we're glad to have you here with us today. And we're very excited. I was introduced to Rooted about a little more than a year ago. Caleb had invited me in and told me about Rooted, and then Mariners Church has been doing Rooted now for 6 or 7 years, and I'm glad that you're here to hear about it. We have a lot of churches across the country that are participating in Rooted. Some have been tracking along from the beginning. Some have just kind of signed on in the last year. And so we're excited to tell you about what we've discovered and how it is impacting not only Mariners Church, but quite a number of other churches as well. So Caleb, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you, and you can kind of give us a background of how Rooted came about and what it's doing at Mariners in California.
Certainly. Thanks so much, Alan. Robin and I, as you can see if you're watching live, are sharing an office just because it's simpler. So we'll be going back and forth with some question and answer later, which will be helpful. But I lead the Mariners Church that's in Huntington Beach. So, but where we're sitting is in Mariners Irvine, which is a 50-year-old church. This church has been around 50 years, going back to when it began in a home in Newport Beach. And it outgrew that home, obviously, and it moved to an elementary school named Mariners Elementary School, and that's how the title, that the church's name came to be. And off it went from there. So 50 years ago, this church started, and Kenton Beshore, who is currently the senior pastor at Mariners Irvine, has been leading the church for 30 years. And phenomenal leader. Robin and I both are big fans of Kenton. And in that time, as Kenton would tell the story, the church began to become much bigger, and it moved from property to property, landing on the property where we are now, which is technically in Irvine, California. And as it expanded, the people expanded, and so did the programs. And what Mariners found is that it had an overgrown ministry structure. That it was one of those menu type churches where we got something for everybody. Come on in. We've got a dog walking small group. We've got a underwater basket weaving connection group. We've got it's endless opportunities for people to plug in and do different things. Came with that was a lack of central focus, a lack of clarity on really what are we about as a church. We try to do Sundays really well, but then all through the week it's kind of a free-for-all, pick and choose whatever you want, and hopefully you connect. And what happened there was that a lack of clear pathway developed. So if someone shows up on a Sunday, what do you want me to do would be a question. Well, look at our menu and you can choose any number of things. But it wasn't really serving us and serving our people in terms of moving them intentionally towards a term that we might use, discipleship, or towards spiritual maturity. And so Kenton wrestled with that for years and wanted to really zero in. I think that the simple church movement and books had an influence, and we're trying to figure out what that looks like at Mariners. And personally, Caleb, have been on staff at Saddleback Church years prior, and I've seen the base path, and there's genius in that. There's great things about that. Mariners didn't go that direction, but was trying to figure out, well, what is our direction? What is it that we're really going to stack hands on that works for us, that we believe in terms of moving people towards spiritual maturity? And what they did, Kenton ended up on a trip to Nairobi, Kenya. And there was someone from Nairobi, Kenya that had been coming to the church and that had come on part-time staff and had come on staff. And he's like, I got to take you to my church in Nairobi. I got to take you to this place. And so he took a small group of people. Robin might have been on one of the very first trip to Nairobi.
Yeah.
And so she was a part of that first pilot trip that went over, and they witnessed what was happening in Nairobi, Kenya. And there was a pastor there named Marathi who would come up with a 10-week experience. I say experience, and we say experience all the time because it's really not programmatic. It's more truly, it's more experiential. It's more of a process. And what it did in Nairobi, and what we've adapted here, is it put people into groups right from the start. Get into this group, and you're going to go through this 10-week experience together in this group. I don't care if you've never been to the church before. I don't care if you've been walking with Jesus for 50 years. Get into this group. And so our team that was there was so impressed, was so enamored with what was happening in Nairobi, Kenya, that we brought it back. And with permission and with agreement, we rewrote it and made it, we Americanized it, we made it work for the people of Mariners Church, contextualized it for this culture, but used the same principles. And I think that that's one of the reasons why God is blessing it like crazy, is because we brought it from Africa. Whereas a generation ago, it seemed like it was the Great White Hope going out and doing ministry in all these places around the world. Hey, we'll come and help you. We'll teach you stuff. And now it's us going to Africa and learning from them and bringing back an experiential tool that has revolutionized our church. So we'll tell you more of the details. Let me just tell you some of the life change that we've seen practically at Mariners Church. So not just Mariners Church Irvine, but Huntington Beach, Mission Viejo, San Juan Capistrano, Ocean Hills. We have 4 Mariners churches, and all of us are experiencing these things. We have seen 90% of groups go on to become life groups. So these groups that we throw people into, and we call it Rooted, and here you go, off you go, somewhere between, I don't know, 8, 12, 15 people are in these groups. We take them through this 10-week journey and this experience. 90% of them continue on in what we call life groups or small groups or whatever you refer to them as. After that, 70% of the people in the group continue into the next season. So if there's 10 people in this Rooted group, 7 of them continue on. And now you have people that are plugged into community that weren't before. We see 82% of people that go through Rooted change their giving. Either they start giving and they hadn't prior, or they were already giving and they increase it. 82% of the cases, 82% of the people, that's the experience. And we're not talking about a handful. We're talking about like 50,000 people that have gone through Rooted now, somewhere in that area. And this is what we're seeing in terms of the life change. And then lastly, 70% increase their serving. So they weren't serving prior, and now they start serving. Or they were serving periodically and when they felt like it, and now they serve more systematically, more intentionally, more frequently. Now, bigger picture, getting people into groups, here are some ways that we talk about it. We say that, and I think we ripped this off from Andy Stanley, that we move from rows to circles, that in rows are for inspiration, circles are for transformation, that we want to get people from the rows on Sundays into the circles, and Rooted is our mechanism. If anyone asks, hey, what do we do? We're new to church, get into Rooted. Hey, well, we just moved in from South Carolina because we couldn't stand it there. Get into Rooted. Get into Rooted. Get into Rooted. That's your next step. That's the thing that you need to do. So it's not this menu of options anymore. Your first and foremost step, it doesn't matter if you don't believe in Jesus or you've been walking with Jesus for 50 years, get into Rooted. It's your first step. It's how we plug you into this community, and it's how we plug you into smaller community for life change, for ongoing relationship, to do life together, and these groups continue to live on. It's the one thing that we do. It's the one thing that we focus on. It's our one thing. It's Rooted. It's not, choose A, B, C, or D. It is Rooted. Get into Rooted. Now, let me tell you, after the one thing, what the difference is about Rooted. Just a couple of things that are different about Rooted. Rooted is experiential. Rooted moves from the programmatic to the engaged. It's not classroom based. You're not sitting and listening to somebody talk. You are in a circle with people, reading materials, doing homework 5 nights a week, and then meeting with people 1 time a week and saying, here, this is what my questions are. This is what I'm going through. And we see every single session of Rooted, we see people who are far from God, don't feel like God cares about them, don't feel connected to God or church, make decisions to follow Jesus. Simultaneously, we see people that maybe are are a little bit on the religious side of the scale and not really engaged in their faith, but it's just in their heads, and they know the right things to say and they know the right formulas. When they get into a circle like this, they're knee to knee with other people who are going through their own journeys, and they're able to grow in their compassion. They're able to see other people's stories, other people's life change, maybe even someone else come to Jesus through this process, and it reignites their faith. It opens their eyes to the fact that God's using this simple tool all over the country and all over the world to make disciples, to introduce people to Jesus, and to help people grow in their faith. I said that it's not classroom-based. It happens in this circle. And then we have several experiences that are a part of this thing. We push people into a prayer experience. Some people, before they go through Rooted, have never prayed out loud before. But we say, you're going to pray, and you don't have to share about it, and you don't have to pray out loud, and we're not forcing you. But if you would just come and be a part of this simple experience, your mind might be changed about what prayer is. You might have a whole new experience with God, that He's a personal God that knows your name and just might whisper something to you. And time again, I hear stories, we hear stories about people who were so nervous and sweaty when they walked into a prayer experience, and they decided to engage and lean in, and God met them there in some small way, or perhaps in some big, meaningful way. And now prayer isn't a weird and scary thing. Prayer is something that they're able to whisper prayers to God the next day and the next morning. So prayer experience is a big deal. When people get through week 3 in the prayer experience, they stick. They don't quit. They go all the way through to the 10th and final week. And then we have the serve experience, so we mobilize people into the community and into serving. They serve together, so they have that as a bonding experience, and they see that A, they have a sphere of influence that they should be serving in, and B, there's a poor and there's a marginalized in their community, near their community, that they can pay attention to and be intentional about coming alongside and making a difference in some way. And that galvanizes groups together. It also inspires people to continue to do something with their lives and not just pretend like there aren't poor people in their community. And then we encourage people to write down their story and share their story. And at the very end, we baptize people. And every single session, there's tons of people that want to be baptized. Maybe they were baptized in the Catholic Church, but they don't remember it. It wasn't their decision, and they want to be baptized again. Or maybe baptism is so foreign to them, but they want to make that declaration, that statement that this is mine, I'm owning my faith, I want to do this. And we baptize folks. So you see the experiences all along the journey that are so meaningful, that are a little bit risky for people. They aren't just in a sterile classroom setting. It's life on life, and it's pushing people into action, and lives are changing. And it is so beautiful for me as a lead pastor to be able to see, to be able to know that, man, there's another Rooted session that just started. We're going to see life change. And there's another Rooted session that just started. We're going to increase our life groups by another 8 groups this fall. And Rooted has become such an incredible tool of life change for individuals, but also change for our church. And I just get to see this happening season after season. We do it 3 seasons a year. And it's had a profound impact on Mariners Church, Huntington Beach, all the Mariners churches, and now I don't know, somewhere around 150 churches around the country. So that is all for me about that. I'm going to turn it over to Alan. I think that you're next.
I am next, but one question before you go. Cody asks, is Rooted for a first-time guest, for someone who's newly saved? How do people jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me just give you what we did 2 weeks ago. So the fall kicks off, and at the kickoff of the fall, I think that our life is wired into seasons, right? There's rhythms to life. There's days, there's weeks, there's fall, winter, spring, summer, and so we leverage those built-in seasons and rhythms. And so we kick off Rooted in the fall, and we say, starting in the end of August and into September, and beginning of September, if you haven't done Rooted yet, you're doing Rooted. You got to sign up on the patio, get into Rooted. I say this from stage, if you are here for the first time today, this is your first Sunday, you've never been in church before, sign up for Rooted. If you don't like it, I'll give you your money back. If you don't like it, we'll make an arrangement. You're going to have an incredible experience. Sign up for Rooted. So I don't even care if they're newly saved, not saved, been walking with Jesus for 50 years. It doesn't matter. Anyone wherever they are on their spiritual journey, this experience is relevant, and we see people having great experiences at the whole spectrum of the journey. And so we just tell them, sign up on the patio. Groups are starting whenever they're starting, Tuesday night or this week or whatever, next week or whenever it is, and we get them in there. We plug them in as fast as we can.
That's good. Thank you, Caleb. And if you have questions that come up as we go ahead and put those in the question box. We're going to take some time at the end to answer your questions, but go ahead and put it in there while you're thinking about it, and then we will cover everybody's questions at the end. One of the things that drew me to Rooted especially was the idea of experiential learning, and the idea of using more of your being to grow in God, allow God to connect with you. I mean, so often, so much of Christian education is cerebral, and yet we can know a lot of the Bible, but living it out and how it affects our attitudes and everything else. That's why what I like about Rooted, with large group experiences, small group experiences, a prayer experience, a serving experience, celebrations, and a variety of other things that go into it. But not only is it a non-Western approach, I mean, Rooted is something that follows methods that were used by the first century church, by the Moravians, by the Celtics, by the early Wesleyans, early Methodists. And so it's not something that's brand new, just out of the box, the best things in sliced bread kind of a deal, but something that's been around, but maybe some things that that were embraced by the non-Western world, but then were maybe not used as much for the Western world, since we were going so much for the head. So anyway, let me just want to let you guys know we are going to do a couple of Rooted gatherings. One in California coming up in November at Mariners Church. One in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in March at Compass Christian Church out in Colleyville, Texas. And wanted you to make you aware of that. You can find more information online at experiencerooted.com/events, and we'll have this information for you again at the end of the webinar. One of the things that I like to see is something that's not a flash in the pan, and this is another thing that fascinated me about Rooted. It's one thing to do a 6-week thing or a 40-day thing, and nothing against anything anybody else has ever done, but it's easy to do those and get a lot of excitement going for 6 weeks, and then at the end of 6 weeks just watch the thing fall off the cliff. And so seeing how Rooted has helped to motivate people into continuing with life groups, to continue serving, to continue to be engaged, there's something about it that's transformative. And to see how God can use a tool like this based on His Word and transform lives, whether they've been Christians forever or whether they don't even know Christ when they come into the group in some cases, and they meet Christ in the group. But how the groups are formed. I mean, some of it, if you guys follow my stuff, I rely very heavily on established relationships. And of course, people that know each other can get together in a Rooted group, but also have seen people that they're maybe new to the church, new to the area, they don't know anybody. And maybe they're even placed into a Rooted group, that the experience of Rooted helps to bond them together. And part of the reason they're bonded together is because it involves a little bit of risk. I was just with a church in the Dallas-Fort Worth area this last weekend training their group leaders, and I asked them, at what point in your life did you grow spiritually? And what we came up with was most of us grew spiritually either during a point of pain in our life, an intense time of pain in our life, or when we risked to try something new. Now, what I told them was, when they went back to their group, to say, well, in order to grow spiritually, you have to experience a lot of pain. That's not going to be very popular. It'd be very hard to market that idea in our churches. But the idea of, what if you took a risk? What if you took a calculated risk and tried something that was different, like a 2-hour prayer time, or tried something different than maybe you typically have in a group, that experience draws us closer to God. It also draws us closer to each other, and it helps groups to go for the long term. And of course, with any group, you want to have coaching. And so in your church, you want to have leaders that support other leaders and can keep them going. In the Rooted Network, as we've seen many, many churches that have decided to come on board and to launch Rooted in their churches, we offer coaching to them and best practices from other churches. And maybe it's introducing them to a church of a similar size, a church of a similar tradition, a church from their neck of the woods. And so coaching is very important. You also want to offer them some kind of a next step. And so with a 10-week experience of Rooted, usually somewhere around week 7, the idea is introduced of what would happen with the group for the next semester, to offer a next step like Caleb's Favor with Kings, or there are other studies in the Rooted series, other things that Mariners has created, or it's just the rhythms of Rooted, and they just kind of continue to follow some of the patterns that are formed in the Rooted curriculum. But a next step is huge, because if you've done any kind of a church-wide thing, if you've done any kind of a big emphasis, and at the end of a time your groups fall off, well, it's because you didn't invite them to anything else. They said, well, I signed up for 6 weeks or 10 weeks or whatever, and now it's over, and so I guess we're done. And so you want to give them some kind of heads up that something else is coming. And then Caleb mentioned this earlier. You also want to pay attention to the seasons and the rhythms of the church calendar. And I'll give you kind of a typical one, but it may not be exact for everybody. There's a season between September and November that's really, really strong for small groups. Would be a really strong time to launch Rooted. For those of you in Canada, you may want to wait to Canadian Thanksgiving in October and then go from there until the end of the 10 weeks. November and December, I tell you what, it's hard to do anything formal because you have the Christmas holidays. And so really between Thanksgiving and New Year, you would ask the groups to focus more on group life, have a party, serve together, because the groups are more about group life than just doing studies. And studies are important, but again, we want to recognize these rhythms. Maybe again launch January, March, have more people come into Rooted, have something for those fall groups to continue into. April through June, again, another great season, and then you hit the summer and you focus more on group life. You do social times, maybe invite new people to your group, you serve together in some way. I've had groups during the summer go on vacation together, go camping together. I had one group out of the church I served here in Greenville that went on a cruise together. They met people from Greenville on the cruise, and when they came back, those people joined their small group. But that's kind of a good season or rhythm of the year. There are some groups, my last group was Die Hard, we met 52 weeks of the year, but not every group is like that. But again, these are kind of good rhythms to have in place. Again, part of the reason that I'm an advocate of Rooted is, a lot of the things that we've been doing, a lot of the things that have been popular in small groups have been going for quite a while now. And as we know, our culture continues to change. The other thing that we see sometimes is that we put a lot of effort into things and maybe we don't quite get the result that we would like to get out of that. And this is why I'm fascinated with Rooted. Because not only have I talked to the staff at Mariners, pastors from other churches, group leaders that I've met, group members that I've met, but to see something that provides a lasting change and to see life transformation happen in a dramatic way has really been remarkable to me personally. And it's so different from, if you've been around me and been on other webinars, I'm all about DVD curriculum and church-wide campaigns and all of this. There's no DVD to Rooted, and you don't start out by launching a big church-wide campaign. We'll tell you a little bit more about that in a minute. But it's been really cool to see something that it's relatively new to me, but in its history is actually relatively old, and to see how God is using it. And to me, the results of Rooted are just they're remarkable. And that's why I get excited about this, and that's why I'm part of this team. All right, so I'm going to let Robin come on and give you some details. Somebody had asked a question about who's that lady that Caleb pushed off into the corner. That would be Robin, and here she is, front and center.
Hi, thank you. So first, just as an introduction, so I've been on staff at Mariners Irvine for 9 years, and as Caleb mentioned, was on the trip when we went to Kenya and discovered Rooted and brought it back. And as Alan was just sharing, it's been amazing to me to be on the front lines of this journey that God's had for our church and the transformation that's taken place, not just in our people, which is amazing, but collectively and corporately as a church, we're different. We are more worshipful. We've had a prayer movement that's been birthed out of the prayer initiative that's in Rooted, and much more dependence and even awareness of the power of the Holy Spirit that's available to break strongholds, more accountable as a staff. It's changed our culture as a staff in our church. And what's been incredible, though, is to see in the last 6 years what God's done with Rooted beyond Mariners. And so what I'd want you to know is that we did not foresee all that God has done by any stretch. Again, as Caleb shared, our senior pastor was on a mission to make sure that his legacy was about disciples, that were people that were actively following Jesus, and that was way beyond the Bible studies that we were offering at the time. And gosh, as a result, through the life change of people and who have friends and family in different locations and different churches, Rooted has just grown organically. And so in the last 3 years so about 2013 is when other churches started calling, and it's been incredible to see what God has done as a result of that. Caleb mentioned all the churches that are using Rooted in the nation, and now there's another 75, and I'm going to talk a little bit about like how you get started, but another 75 churches just in the last 5 months that are saying we're in, we want to try this out, we want to see what Rooted is about, and they're doing a pilot. And as a result of that, there's best practices that are growing across the nation that are influencing other churches, but also Mariners as well. And so we've been in this season of trying to not even harness, but leverage the favor and the momentum of Rooted and trying to resource church as well. So what we've created, which is something that's new in the last several months, is what we call a pilot kit. You can purchase one online at experiencerooted.com, and essentially what we've tried to do there is make it real easy to figure out what Rooted is, because we can talk about it all day long, but because we didn't understand it until we experienced it, we've realized that's the best way to figure out what Rooted is and how the potential it has to influence your church. And also, one of the best things, as you all know, anytime you want to try something new, getting senior pastor buy-in and key stakeholders buy-in and approval is critical. And what we found, what we did is launch Rooted. First, we did a pilot with our staff. Kenton, our senior pastor, and a group of us had kind of done our own pilot in Kenya, and so we got to witness it and be a part of it firsthand. And so then we came back and did a pilot with all of our staff and key leaders before we launched it to the church. And so what we found is that's the best strategy in order to move at Rooted and to create the momentum in a healthy way. And so again, starting with a pilot kit, that includes 12 of the Rooted books, 2 facilitator guides, as well as access to the online resources we have. So again, we're in the process of formalizing our training and support materials, but online are all kinds of resources in addition to weekly facilitator training videos to guide you through the pilot. And of course, our staff, our team, the Rooted Network team is here to answer any questions. And then we have coaches like Alan and some others that can help with more specific coaching needs. And then one of the next things that we have available is the Rooted Gathering. You saw the slides for that. There's 2 dates coming up. We have one in November in California, as well as one in Texas in March. We're super excited about that. That's actually hosted by Compass Christian. They've invited us there so that they can share Rooted with their friends and local churches, as well as anybody coming more from the East Coast. And the Rooted Gathering is intended to answer the questions around the what, why, and how of Rooted, and really drive in, we hope, the experiential nature of Rooted that's so unique. And the first time we brought it back from Kenya, we redid it and like westernized it and tried to teach it. We tried to do it in a classroom format, and we really kind of wrecked it, and so I had to go back to the drawing board and stay true to the principles and the framework that our partner in Kenya had developed. And so you'll get to experience a lot of that through the Rooted Gathering. And what's really fun, one of my favorite things, actually probably my favorite thing about the gathering, is that it coincides, both of them, the one in California as well as the one in Texas, coincide with the final celebration of a Rooted session. And so the Friday night, after you've gone through the 2 days of experiencing and learning about Rooted and the how and the mechanics, is then you go into the celebration and get to witness firsthand all the life change that Caleb was telling you about. You get to see life groups that have so bonded through their Rooted experience, and they're so excited to go on and continue, but celebrating people coming to Christ for the first time in their groups, making commitments to giving, being baptized that night with all of their group and family there to celebrate. I mean, it's something, it's amazing. And one of the things that we do as part of Rooted on the first night of the groups is ask people, why are you here? And it's incredible and a really good way to take the temperature of the people in your church to hear what are the desires of their hearts that have motivated them to show up in a group with a bunch of people that they don't know and to go on this journey that we've made very clear from the beginning is going to involve risk. It's going to push them out of their comfort zone. And so we get to hear on the first night why they're there. And then at the very end, the last time they meet as a Rooted group, we ask them, how did God speak to you? How did he change your life in this 10 weeks? And then they'll write out that story, and we collect those. And at the celebration, we do the cardboard testimonies, which I'm sure you've seen. A lot of churches do that at Easter, and it's become a hallmark and a favorite of our Rooted celebration, where everyone is able to celebrate together some of the most amazing stories of life change. And so that culminates the Rooted Gathering and helps people really have a perspective on what that could look like for their church. And as Caleb said, again, there's churches all over the nation that are doing Rooted, and some even globally. Right now, Rooted is also available in Spanish, and through the network of churches that are doing Rooted, and through, they either have global communities in their area or are partnering with global churches that they want to share Rooted with. Rooted's being translated into Korean, Arabic, Mandarin, Nepalese, Japanese, and Bangladesh. And then we're also working on an audio version. So I'm super humbled and excited to be a part of, continuing to be a part of the story God's writing with Rooted, and grateful for the opportunity just to share a bit about our story and our journey. Lastly, I'd say Andrew Accardi, he led the purpose-driven movement at Saddleback, and I was getting some counsel and guidance from him, and he shared a quote that I thought was amazing because it so mirrors our experience with Rooted. So when you're doing something new, it takes 1 year to understand it, 3 years to create culture, and 7 to ensure a legacy. And I've seen, like, wow, it was right about the 3-year mark is when we realized the full potential of what Rooted could offer our church and our people and the impact it could have on our culture. And so again, it's one of those things that's like, start small and yet start with the end in mind, and go on this journey, and we would be grateful to go on it with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. That was very good. Give us some information, and again, you don't necessarily jump in with both feet at the beginning. You kind of test the waters with staff or with a pilot, and then begin to adopt that in the rest of the church. One more detail. I know some of you are going to have to jump off, so I just want to give you this one detail, and then we're going to get into questions. And that is next Wednesday at 1:30 Eastern, 10:30 Pacific. We're going to do a webinar specifically for senior pastors. So I know there were some senior pastors on the webinar today, but if this is of interest to you, we're going to do a webinar again with myself, Caleb, and Robin next week, but specifically address questions and insights for senior pastors. And if you're interested in that, you can go to the same website as The Gathering, experiencerooted.com/events. And your senior pastor can register there. If you would like to take a look at the Rooted curriculum. You can request a sample kit, again, at the experiencerooted.com website, as well as the Rooted Gathering. The cool thing about being with this church in the Dallas-Fort Worth area in March is that they're well into Rooted. They're an independent Christian church. They were with us in the last gathering in June, and they have seen really strong success. And it's cool to see across denominations, different parts of the country, different size churches, to see the impact that Rooted has had and to see how this fits. And so very excited to be with them in Texas. All right, so let's take a couple of questions. And Caleb and Robin, if you can come back, I don't want to answer all of these. But we'll start with some of these. First question is, could Rooted be done as an all-church campaign? And I would say the answer is yes and no. All right. So the yes would be, yes, you can roll it out. I'm working with a church right now in Redwood City, California, in the San Francisco Bay Area, and their intent was to launch Rooted for the first time as a church-wide campaign this fall. I encouraged them to come to the Rooted gathering. They learned a little more about Rooted. They're piloting a number of groups this fall, and then next fall they're going to be launching it church-wide. So yes, you can launch it church-wide, but it's different than what you think in that you'll want to pilot it with some groups in your church before you get into something with the whole church. All right, the next question is from Justin. He says, how many people typically sign up for Rooted but then drop out and don't finish all 10 weeks?
That's a great question. So we've seen a typical attrition rate from week 1 to week 10 is in the 5 to 10%, and it typically happens all between week 1 and week 3. Week 3 is when the prayer experience is, and it's amazing how that bonds the group, and then after that, the attrition rate is nearly 0.
So praying for 2 hours might scare a handful of them is what you guys are saying.
Well, and I think another point on that is on the first night, on the kickoff night, the senior pastors, like Caleb, will give a vision for what they've now signed up for and raises the bar and lets them know right from the get-go that it's going to involve risk, that it's going to be uncomfortable, but that if they really want to experience God and to have their lives transformed, they're going to need to be willing. And that there's also a requirement for attending to not miss more than 2 out of the session. So that kicks them off and is on week 3. And so as they kind of find their way with schedules and what they're comfortable with, that's typically what drives some of that.
Totally true.
Right.
Alan, let me add 20 seconds on the first question, because it made me think. My dad tried to roll out Rooted as a church-wide campaign, doing messages on Sundays, and he didn't quite get the vision. I mean, he does now, but he didn't quite. He leads a church in Arizona, and the reason why is that Purpose-Driven Life, or these other campaigns, even the Favor with Kings that I just did, it's a great campaign. Favor with Kings is a great campaign for 6 weeks, 7 weeks, but then you move on to the next series. Rooted is something that we don't move on from. It's integrated into how we do church, and so every fall, every winter, and every spring, we're taking new people through. And I'm not going to base my messages off of Rooted each of those times, or the next crop of people through. So it just becomes the underlying fabric of how we do what we do, and that's why it doesn't quite resonate with the campaign theme, in addition to what you described, Alan. Sorry, that's just...
No, and that's good. And I think another thing, too, just from a couple other questions that popped up, is that most people will do Rooted as a participant mainly one time. Some people may do it more than once, either because they bring a friend with them or if they're facilitating a group for other people. But Rooted is ongoing in that you're not going to get 100% of your people into Rooted the first time out, and by piloting it, you'll probably understand maybe why 100% the first time out would not be a good idea. There may come a time when you hit kind of a critical mass and you do your pilot and then you have a bunch of people in Rooted at once, but it's going to continue on. Did I get that right, Caleb, or am I?
Absolutely. And
Okay.
there's 10% of the most congregations that are transitioning every year just because of job change, just because of relocations, just because of life situations and stages, not because they don't like your church or my church, but they're just moving physically and moving on, or maybe into different seasons of life. And so there's 10% of people just coming in. If you're not even like trying that hard, but then if you're intentional about reaching more people and creating a culture of inviters, we've been at Rooted for 4 years in Mariners HB, and we have I don't know what it is, like 7% of our weekly attendance is going through Rooted again right now this fall. These are brand new people to our church, so they just keep on coming. It's so fun.
But the idea is, and Caleb expressed this earlier, is that you don't say, oh, you want to get involved, here are 14 or 54 or 86 different ways that you could get involved. The answer is, oh, you want to get involved. Well, your first step in involvement is Rooted.
Correct.
And then from Rooted, then they would continue in, or maybe that group would continue as an ongoing life group, but they would study a variety of topics over time. You're not studying Rooted over and over and over again, unless you want to. But it's kind of the way that you get everybody started and kind of set that tone, so you don't have all of these things competing, and it just becomes very clear to people. Steve is asking how Rooted got its name.
Oh, good question. Did you want to say about expectation?
Oh, I was just going to say it creates an expectation, Alan. It creates an expectation when you go through Rooted that we're going to go on and be a life group that studies these different curriculums, and I like Not a Fan, and I like this thing by Dave Ramsey, and I like this by this. But at the same time, we're going to keep serving together.
Right.
We're going to keep praying together. This is going to be how we operate, and that's kind of the foundation that Rooted helps to lay for those groups. Rooted got its name from Africa. They called it Mzizi, which is, there you go, you got all the names there. Mzizi in Swahili means rooted, and so we just call it Rooted. And that's the deal. And then those are all the other names. They're different translations, different parts of the world, places that are using Rooted, and that's as simple as it is.
All right, then Don had a question about how people are put into Rooted groups, and I think different ways. Is that true, Robin?
Yes. We have three kind of key filters. One is geography, with the intent, hoping that that helps people stay on as a life group. So we'll filter by geography, then life stage, and then what we call affinity, whether if somebody wants to be in a men's group, women's group, married, singles, that kind of thing. And then, of course, if people have come together and they want to go through with a friend, we obviously ask for those requests and filter them accordingly.
Yeah, and that's good. And part of the reason for geography, especially Mariners Irvine, is that the Rooted groups meet on campus, whereas in Mariners Huntington Beach, they don't have a campus yet, but they're working on it, getting closer, right, Caleb?
That's right.
And so, but there is a difference because they would start meeting off campus because they're in a rented facility for the weekend services, and so that would go a little differently. And we all know moving things from on campus to off campus could be a little tricky sometimes. So that would be the differentiation there. Jason asked, how do you train people to lead the groups so that you know that the experience people have will be consistent?
Yeah, great question. And the primary way is people who have gone through Rooted and have experienced it themselves and are passionate about the Rooted model. So what we found is it was not our traditional Bible study leaders or some of our men's or women's group leaders that were passionate about teaching God's Word and helping people understand some of the truths in God's Word, but more the person who's willing to facilitate a conversation with people of different varying spiritual backgrounds or beliefs or spiritual maturity, and be okay with awkward silence and not providing the answer. And so what we found is people that have gone through Rooted that really get it and are super passionate, they make the best facilitators. And we intentionally call them group facilitators instead of leaders to try to help cast the vision for the expectation. That's
right. You've got people that have been trained in a manner of lecture and whatever, if they try to bring that into Rooted, they screw the whole thing up, and it's not a good group experience. You want people that, even if they have great Bible knowledge and they're a great teacher, that they have the ability to facilitate, to draw out from others, and invite others to participate in a safe place, not lecture.
Yeah, and if I could add one more thing, great group facilitators. So one of the things Caleb mentioned that happens in Rooted is people share their stories, which is another key bonding factor. So each week, 1 or 2 people will share their story, kind of a short life story, why they're here, how they got to church, what they believe about God, what their journey with God has looked like, do they know Jesus, and for that to go well, the facilitator leads off the first or second week, and the people who are vulnerable and honest, some of the best groups, even if they're our pastors, when they're leading out of their pain or sharing their struggle with whatever's going on in that particular season of life, gives everyone else permission, and that's also a real key factor for setting the tone for the group from the beginning.
Lastly, I would say we train them just in time.
Yeah.
So we have a training ahead of time. We've identified people that we think could be good facilitators, and then we train them on Sunday during one of the services in a room somewhere, and then they go and facilitate their group that night, or Tuesday night, or Wednesday night, or Thursday night, and so they're getting real-time facilitation training and check-ins week to week through the whole experience.
As some of it is different than what you would expect in a typical small group, so training is definitely needed. David writes, how long did you do Rooted before it became the only thing?
Oh, good question. So back to that quote that Andrew gave me, it was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly. It took us a couple years. By the end of the 3rd year is when we had fully realigned our church and moved away completely from the menu model to Rooted as the front door and the answer to every question. It took us a bit. Keep in mind we had a very complex menu-driven model, but we started working on it after the end of the first full year or 3 sessions of Rooted.
That's good. And then he has another question. How did you convert people who are emotionally invested in other programming that you previously offered? These are the people that I affectionately refer to as like women addicted to Beth Moore.
Okay. Well, I'll share a quote from our senior pastor. He always says, go with those who want to go with you. And applies the 20-60-20 principle, which 20% are going to be super excited about the new thing and all in from the beginning. Those were our early adopters, key influencers that we used as facilitators. And then there's 60% that are going to be willing to go with the new direction, and then 20% that aren't going to be okay with it at all. And the mistake often, as he coached us, is that we as leaders try to convert that bottom 20%, and that's just wasted effort, and to be okay with them not being okay with the new direction. And that's what we saw. There were a lot of people that, and I don't know if a lot, I can't quantify the number, but there were those that weren't happy with the new direction and didn't stick around and didn't stay. And at the same time, there were those, we made it a leadership requirement. So Kenton said, for all leaders, at the end of the first full year of Rooted, you had to have completed Rooted or you weren't in a leadership position, which included the board of elders. And so they all complied. And then what's been amazing, though, is to see at almost the end of the 3 years, people that left that were in a leadership capacity or positions have since come back when they saw what God was doing with Rooted and through it, and they wanted to be a part of it. So it's been fun. It wasn't always easy, but definitely fun to see God move.
And there's a way that you can sometimes bring people along. There are people that just get mad and leave, and oh well. But there's a way that you can bring people along in this journey and value the things that they value while saying, hey, here's the direction we're going. I really hope that you're on board, because after you go through this 10-week Rooted experience, you can still do a bit more Bible study on the other side. But here is who we are, and here is how we operate, and this is the foundation that we're laying. And I try to teach from the stage all the time that you can't keep growing spiritually unless you care about the people who aren't here yet. You're going to hit your spiritual growth ceiling if you're not acting on these convictions, if you're not acting on the truth, and if you're not inviting other people to come along on this journey, if it's just about you and what you're dumping into your head, you're done growing spiritually. You think you're growing, you're just taking in information. You're not growing. This is a part of the growth process and how we invite more people into it.
I have a couple questions from Don and Diana. Similar question about how large is a rooted group?
Typically between 12 and 15 people.
Okay.
That's ideal. We've had some, I did this last rooted session with one of our pastors, and there were 20 people in the group besides us. And we thought, oh my gosh, there's no way this group is going to stick together. We may have to, and they made it all the way through. No one dropped out. And when we suggested they split into 2 life groups, they were appalled and offended that we would suggest such a thing. And they found a way to meet as like men one week, women another. But the 12 to 15 is what we try to aim and target at. But it still works.
Yeah, you might find yourself in a smaller church and you're like, well, that would mean I've got one group. But it works. It works 7. It works 8. It works 9. I mean, there's all kinds of room in there. But Robin's right. That's a sweet spot around that 10, 12. Once you get to above 15, it's a lot.
Now, David's wondering if there could be an East Coast rooted gathering in Tampa because the weather's really nice. And so, David, I'll answer this one. You throw in some catering from Taco Bus, and we're in. So if you haven't experienced the Taco Bus, you need to. All right. So Steve says, how long do the rooted small groups stay together as a group, and is there a time frame? And then along with that, kind of the idea of groups growing and multiplying and dividing and all of that stuff.
Okay.
Was that clear?
Yeah, I think I understand it. So back to the rhythms chart that Alan went through and Caleb spoke to as well. So again, we launch Rooted every fall, winter, and spring. And at the same time, we launch our groups, our group life, what we call life groups, in fall, winter, and spring. And so that's an event or a season to re-envision and remind the groups again of the rhythms that they learned in Rooted that they need to be about in this next season, regardless of what curriculum they're doing. And so that helps create some spikes within the ministry calendar year to keep the momentum going. And what we also offer, like during that same time and season, is for people who have either gone through Rooted and are not in a small group, or groups who maybe had people move or had to leave and they want to add to their group. We have connection events to help people get reconnected. So trying to continuously build in the rhythms of momentum and reconnection within in alignment with the same rhythms of Rooted.
Yeah, and I'd say just remembering that this is the people business and it's messy and there's no silver bullet. There's still complications and people still have young kids and can't meet every week and have things that go on in their life. And this group, there's still always a couple of people that this group just didn't fit for me, and we try to get them into a different life group. So there's always going to be that messiness that's a part of community life. It's just reality. But the Rooted experience does galvanize a group unlike anything that I've seen, and most people continue on. My group that went through Rooted, we're 3.5 years in and still going strong.
Yeah, I think what's amazing is that the messiness factor you're talking about is absolutely real, and yet the values and the rhythms and the disciplines learned in Rooted are much more conducive to the messiness of life. And so the formulaic, like here's what we have to do in order to, be in the group life rhythms, which is more rigid, doesn't work as well. So yeah, but the messiness is true.
Yeah, that makes sense. And David says it's a done deal with the Taco Bus for the Tampa gathering. But what I think is only people from Florida don't want to go to California when it's cold. So anyway, all right. So Justin asked kind of a long question. I'm going to try to distill it down. I think what he's asking is this: about how many people were in life groups at Mariners before Rooted compared to the number of people that have participated in Rooted and are in ongoing life groups now?
That's a great question. I don't know the number prior. I know our previous model we called small groups. was more curriculum based. And then we had what we called like a Truth Works, which was Bible study classes. We no longer do the Truth Works and the small group ministry. We didn't necessarily transition those intentionally as we, at Irvine, because of the size and scale of what we were dealing with and kind of the change management factor, we just overlaid and introduced something new and allowed that momentum to overtake the other. I know that to date, there's about 360, 375 life groups that have now come out of Rooted that are healthier and stronger than what we had previously.
So you definitely say Rooted has made a difference in just the priority and participation in life groups.
Oh, absolutely. And so back to the earlier question about what about those people, how do you convert? Again, what we saw is the people that were in small groups that didn't want to do Rooted were some of the ones that were kind of the holdouts. But what they saw is God was doing this incredible thing, and they were either going to get to be a part of it or be left behind. And all the energy in terms of investment in the life groups and the leaders and all that was being poured into the new groups coming out of Rooted. And that's what ultimately created kind of this pull to get everybody else on board.
Okay. And David says he's not opposed to California, that the tacos are good there as well. All right. So Jason's asking, how young do you start people into Rooted? I know that there's a student edition. Is that high school? Is that middle school? Where do you start?
So it is, the student version is currently for high school. And we are in the process of partnering with a church in Florida, Beach Church, as well as Compass Christian in Texas, to develop Rooted for Kids, which would be for our children's ministry. So that's in development.
At Mariners Huntington Beach, we have high school students that are going through it right now, and in some situations they use a student, and in our situation they're just using the adult curriculum. So we get them going early, and as Robin said, we're in development on the children's side.
Very good. So I changed the screen because I have a visual now, because Ned, welcome Ned from North Coast. If you go on to the experiencerooted.com website and go under Get Started and scroll down here, there's a place where it says Get a free sample kit. Just click that button. And I did this for Seacoast Church earlier today, and they will send out a sample, and you can see what the Rooted curriculum actually looks like. Okay, so Cody asked an important question. How has Rooted helped to increase people's giving?
Yeah, it's helped to increase people's giving in multiple ways, because one, when you are more bought in and you're more connected to the community, your giving, your tithe, whatever you call it, follows that. We also are very intentional and strategic about the process, and that we just borrowed from, remember, Mavuno in Nairobi, Kenya. And on week 8, we talk about money. And even though it's difficult to talk about money in America and people are skeptical, and because they've been beat over the head, tithe, or whatever they can, or they've seen pastors or leaders swindle money, and so it's such a sensitive topic. On week 8 is the only week. All the other 10 weeks, they are in their groups wherever they meet. In our case, it's often in homes or maybe on the campus of the church or whatever. But on week 8, they get back together from wherever the groups are. They get back together, and I talk to them. The pastor talks to them personally and says, here's the deal. We wanted to pull you guys back together for week 8 so that we could talk about money. I didn't want to just leave that up to the facilitator. I wanted to look you in the eye and talk to you about how the church talks about money. And then so I spend 30 minutes talking about it so that they're not thinking, well, is this just the facilitator's take or whatever, but they're hearing it from the senior pastor, again, because it's such a sensitive topic. And then they break into groups and they have their own discussion from there. But we see time and time again, people go through this experience, they have their perspective renewed, they're more engaged in community, and 80-something% of the time, that giving comes along with it. Would you add something to that, Robin?
Well, just my last group I was in, there where after the discussion with the senior pastor basically rolls out the biblical definition of stewardship and owner versus manager. We had an amazing conversation with people that were struggling with that concept. And by the end of Rooted, when we all shared what God had done in our hearts and how we were responding at the end, 3 of the men had said they were giving a full 10%. They went from 0 to 10% because they felt so convicted about God's take on money and how they had been viewing it. And it was amazing to watch. And then the women shared that had been something they'd been praying about for their husbands because they felt like, it was maybe a stronghold or an issue, not only for their husbands, but in their marriage.
All right, so I'm going to combine a couple questions here. We're almost to the end. We had a lot of good questions today. But as I mentioned before, at Mariners Irvine, the Rooted groups meet on campus. Mariners Huntington Beach Rooted groups meet in other places. Is there a benefit to on-campus and off-campus? And then the follow-up question is, how do you handle childcare during the Rooted groups?
Yeah, so I'll give you the Huntington Beach version of that, and I would say there's a pro-con, right? So it's less hassle in terms of the planning and preparation and finding homes and whatever if you just meet on the campus, if you have the space. But it's easier to transition the groups off campus if they started off campus. So there's that little bit of challenge moving them into a home and getting them off your campus if they've gotten comfortable there. So in our situation, we let a couple of groups meet in our office. We're a move-in, move-out every Sunday church, a mobile church, and so half of our groups are already meeting in homes from the onset, and then half of them are meeting in the office, and they know they're going to be booted out and get into homes after the fact. So there's pros and cons of both approaches. We have some of our groups that provide childcare, not all of them. So because we have different nights of the week, I think at Mariners Irvine there's just Sunday morning and Tuesday night. But for Huntington Beach, because we have space issues, we have Rooted groups meeting Sunday morning, Sunday afternoon, Monday night, Tuesday night, Wednesday night, Thursday night. So there's options, but we only do childcare in the office for one of those nights. So if there's a young couples group and they have young kids, then there's childcare on that evening when that group meets. There's creative ways that you can work with that and build it into something that works for your community.
Okay, that's good. So there's a question about offering. The church is already in a pattern of doing 6-week studies, and that's kind of the pattern they follow with their groups, and so then incorporating Rooted. What I would say on that is you really want to treat Rooted more as a semester. And so if you're doing a pattern of 6-week studies, then you would need to start Rooted prior to when your 6-week studies are going to start, and then it would go a couple of weeks after. The other thing that comes into that is also you can promote Rooted, get people into Rooted, and then if you're doing something else for people that have already graduated from Rooted, then you could promote that after Rooted has got going, because you really want people to get into Rooted as their first experience in group life, and then for folks that have been through Rooted, then you offer them something else. And that may sound a little bit complex, and a few folks may cheat, but if they are cheating, I think that shows their need for Rooted in the first place. So anyway, did I answer that adequately?
Yeah, I think that's wisdom. That's what we do typically is we'll only talk about Rooted for the 3 weeks leading up prior to the launch, even though there may be a group Life Connect event. And then the same, we launched Favor with King groups around the sermon series for people who've already gone through Rooted, but to not confuse our target audience for Rooted, we didn't talk about that until after Rooted launched.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I have a friend of mine that put it this way. He said, if you're promoting more than one thing at a time, then you're casting more than one vision. You're creating division or division. And so you get people into Rooted, and then like what you were doing now at Mariners, you're getting people into Favor with Kings after that. And so you're not confusing them by you have to make a choice one way or the other. If they've been through Rooted, they're not going to do Rooted again. Probably they might, but then another question would be, what's the impact you've seen on people that are already in small groups. They're already in life groups. They already enjoy the benefit of being in community, studying God's Word together. How has Rooted impacted the groups that have already been meeting, and what does that change about those groups? Does it the statement is, does it take them to the next level? What does that look like?
Yeah, I'd love to speak to this. One of the first groups that I did back in 2010 was a women's group and it was about 15 women, the majority of who had attended Mariners Irvine for 15 years or more. They were in multiple Bible studies a week, and all said that they had been Christians for 15 to 20 plus years. When it came time to talk about their faith and the implications of their faith on their life, or to pray out loud, and then when we started talking about strongholds, they were completely at a loss. And it was, as a pastor, it was heartbreaking. They didn't want to pray out loud. They had never done any kind of time of extended prayer and, just being still before God. And what was amazing was to see them being very tentative. You could tell they weren't real happy about what was being asked of them to share, but as they did, and again after we did the prayer experience, to watch people hear for the first time, to hear from God in a personal, unique way, and then to be vulnerable with a group of women and to see that it was okay, not only okay, but that they were loved. And then when we did the week when we talked about strongholds, like what areas of their life did they feel like they weren't experiencing the freedom that seemed so evident in the gospel, and the changes that came as a result. These women became incredible advocates for Rooted, and then continued on as a life group. And they said, we've met as women for years, and we've never had these conversations, and didn't even know, what was going on in each other's lives. So
sometimes
to the next level. I'm sorry, Alan.
Sometimes it is that tool like Rooted to cause people to look at the Bible or things that they know differently, and to process those things differently. I mean, we all know the quote from D.L. Moody that the Bible wasn't given for our information, but for our transformation. And I think there are a lot of people that, it's easy to measure information, the number of books of the Bible that I read, the number of verses that I've memorized, those sorts of things. And God gave us a book and God gave us a brain. That's not a coincidence. But on the other hand, I've seen people get into a lot of minutia in Bible study. I refer to them as Bible connoisseurs. They're just kind of wanting to find something new they've never heard of before. And I had one small group leader came to me talking about some kind of minutia that his group was in. And he says, "What do you think?" I said, "I think your group's in need of a service project." If that's where they were going. So I think that there could be a lot of good at maybe, again, taking a little different approach, maybe breaking their pattern a little bit, doing something that's a little more risky to the group, but not risky in a ridiculous sense, but risky in the sense of trying things on that they've never done before, and then to see the result of that. And over the last year, as my trips to California have happened to have been timed, I've actually been part of the last 3 celebrations at Mariners Church of their Rooted groups, and seen people baptized in the dinner, and seen yell, "I believe," and the cardboard testimonies, and sitting with groups and hearing from them, and seeing that result, to see life change, to hear how excited people are, and what people feel empowered to do in their own lives as well as in ministry. I tell you what, you can't get enough of that. And so if you come to either one of the gatherings, either in California in November or in Texas in March, you'll experience a celebration. I believe that's true. Is that true for Compass? They're having a celebration? Okay.
Very nice.
So you could see that, and if anything else would convince you that Rooted is a good thing, that would be it. So I'm on the experiencerooted.com events page, so a couple of things I wanted to highlight. Can you guys see this okay, or at all? Okay, I got nods. So Senior Pastor webinar is next Wednesday, and so go ahead and register for that. Maybe mention this to your Senior Pastor, or you can email the link over. If you're going to be at Exponential, is this East or West?
This would be West.
Okay, Exponential West on October the 5th. Caleb and Robin are hosting a luncheon, and so you can be a part of that. And then the 2 gatherings are on that page as well. And as with any conference, there is an early bird, a super early bird, a super duper early bird, and the earlier you register, the better your price is going to be. So I encourage you to look into those as well. Caleb or Robin, any final thoughts?
Well, I'll just add a couple things. I know we're also going to be at Catalyst East Coast. We'll have a booth and a team there. Comes Christian is joining us, as well as the Missio Nexus Conference and something else. So I'll make sure the events page gets updated. But there's a few more opportunities to connect with the Rooted Network team coming up soon.
Yeah, hope to see you at one of our gatherings.
All right. I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Sometime later this afternoon, I'll send you a link to the recording of the webinar that you can share with other team members or just have as a reminder. But I would encourage you, order the sample kit, look into some of these other opportunities to connect, get your senior pastor on next week, because a lot of the impact of Rooted has to do with the senior pastor's enthusiasm for it, promotion of it. So I would encourage you to take advantage of these things. There's a lot of other tools and resources, a lot of other stories of individuals and churches on the Experience Rooted website. So go spend a little time on there and find out a little bit more about what's going on with Rooted. So thank you very much for your time today. If we missed any questions afterward, you can email. Who should we have them email, Robin?
You can email me.
Okay, so rriley@experiencerooted.com, right? Okay.
Correct.
Very
Yep.
good.
Follow up.
All right. Thank you, guys. Glad to have you.
Thank you.